content over everything.
Bob, I just want to tell you, what you say about Ottomans and ISIS is correct, but they're not representing Islam.
So the Ottomans don't represent Islam. Do the Ottomans represent Islam? To an extent, yes.
Yeah. But at the same way, the Byzantines also represent Christianity. And everything that you said about Islam and everything you said about Jesus, I can find with the Prophet Muhammad. I can find in Islam also. So
Okay, let's do a quick test of that claim.
What you've done right now was very carefully, selectively looked at history. You pointed out what you did like. But then at the same time, you know, history is extremely complex. It's not one-dimensional. You, for example, claimed, you did say that Christianity, you said that the Christians fought against slavery for 2,000 years.
Yep.
You know what, I agree with you to an extent. But then also, if you look in history, you find that the Slavic people in Eastern Europe were enslaved by the Romans who freshly converted to Christianity.
Yep.
So you find this in history throughout.
So now let me return to that point, because you said I was very selective. So let's be very specific. Did Muhammad own slaves?
Yes, he did.
Did Muhammad permit his followers to sell slaves?
Yes.
Did Jesus?
No.
So there's a difference.
Okay, why?
So now, hold on 1 second.
Okay.
If I follow the example of Jesus, and you follow the example of Muhammad,
Yeah.
which one of us can own another human being as a property?
Well, I wouldn't want to.
No, that wasn't my question.
Yeah.
I said according to our religion, which one of us can?
I can.
There you go.
If the,
That's the
hold
difference.
on, hold on. When I say I can, there's a clause to it. And the clause is that if I live in a society where it's normative, you were speaking of something that was normative during the time of Jesus being alive.
Yes.
And that slave owning was
Normative.
the rule of the day.
And he
Now-
didn't. But
now-
did Muhammad?
Now.
But did Muhammad?
I already explained to you that he did.
Yes,
right?
thank you.
But
So let's drill down into this. Let's drill down into this. Because you've just said that according to Islam, you can own another human being as a piece of property. That's what you said.
well,
And it's on camera. Right, 1 second.
no, hold
Are
on,
you
hold on,
proud
hold on,
of
hold on,
that?
hold on, hold on, hold on.
No, I want to ask you.
No, hold on.
Are
Let
you
me tell-
proud?
let me tell you something.
Are you
Let me
proud
tell
of
you
it?
something. Let me tell you something. I live in a world, okay, as a Muslim, I live in the West. I live in a place where owning a slave is illegal. Okay.
Because of whose influence? Islam or Christianity?
Well, it was not just Christianity.
No, that's not.
It's not just Christianity. It was an amalgamation of many
Is
things.
the slave trade still
The
happening in the
slave
Muslim
trade,
world?
from a historical point of view, first of all,
Is it still happening in the Muslim
I
world?
will answer, but let's have a discussion.
Let's time it. Shall we do 3 minutes? 3 minutes? Yeah, because
But I would love to have a
I was supposed to
versus
answer.
a debate, because I think we gain more benefit. even
yeah,
from
let's.
your
I was
you
supposed
can
to
join-
answer.
You can all
And,
join in.
the brother, he just come in.
You will benefit a lot, because
So, let's start.
everything that you said, there's truth in it.
1 second. We're going to do 3 minutes.
I don't
3 minutes.
have time.
He's going to have 3 minutes. I'm going to have 3 minutes. Once the 3 minutes are in, you just shout time. You stop. So you have the first 3 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Go.
All I'm saying is this. Look, you said a lot of things, and when I said selective, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay? Being selective does not mean that you're telling lies. All I'm saying is that everything that you said about what you said could also be said about Islam. You know, you talked about patience, that Jesus had patience and forbearance. I could say the same thing about the Prophet Muhammad when he went to Taif and was stoned by kids and children and chastised for 13 years in Mecca without retaliation, without plundering people, right? I could say the same thing. Now, you talked about slavery. Now, slavery is a thing that people like to throw the balls and trying to score points. But you will find that various societies have been engaged in slavery. You said that that Christianity somehow had an influence on it. Yes, the Quakers had an influence on ending on slavery, but there was also economical benefits in ending slavery. We find this that today you can go to a database and you find that the ancestors of David Cameron, they got paid compensation because they freed slavery because of the industrial age that came around in modern times. That slavery was not as profitable anymore, and that's why you have the South and East, the South and North divide in America, because there's still people who are holding to traditional values, Christian values also. to say. Now, am I going to say now that this is inherently a Christian problem? No, it's not. Because I look through the lenses of geopolitics, I look through the lenses of sociology, and I look through the lenses of history, and you'll find that it's a human condition to oppress. You will find this amongst Muslims, you find this amongst Buddhists. Yeah? Hindus had slaves. There's caste systems in Hinduism. These are human conditions, you know, and I try to be honest. I look at things in history, Islamic history, and we will come to this because it's one of the ultimate. There's deeply problematic issues amongst the Muslims in their history and things they've conducted and things they've done. I'm not going to lie to you about this. But to somehow pin it back to a religion, I could do the same thing with Christianity. We're very much in the same boat here.
Wait, so are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
So, no, let me reset. Oh, because I'm
40 seconds. 40 seconds.
Thank you.
okay, so reset and then I'll do 3 minutes. When you're ready.
Let me take 2 seconds.
No.
Islam encourage
I'm talking with
free and slaves.
So
equality
hold on.
between
Yeah.
people.
One
Yes,
second.
yes.
I'll wait until 1 second. Are you ready? Yeah. So my point to you is this. I know that every group of people in every civilization, from a socio-economic and political viewpoint, have done all the same crimes. We're all guilty of the same things. Okay? My point to you is that those things that we would recognize as wrong, like the idea that my ancestors may have at some point owned your ancestors as slaves, we would both say is wrong, I assume. But I can validate that through my example of Jesus. You cannot validate that argument through your example of Muhammad. Because as you have already admitted, Muhammad did have slaves. Muhammad did permit his followers to have slaves. And because you esteem, 1 second, I did not interrupt. So, but then what you are saying is Muhammad is the best of examples, which means that which Muhammad did is normative to you. And when we look at the Quran and the Hadiths, what we see in Sahih al-Bukhari is Muhammad sanctioning the use of slavery. We see in the Quran the sanctioned use of slavery. And because you believe that that is eternal for all times and all people and all places, you can't get away from that reality. Brother, can you tell me when I've got 1 minute left, please? Now, my point to you is, if we are saying that in our conscience and in our intellect, we recognize that me owning you as a slave, or you owning me as a slave, is a moral evil, then it follows that our preeminent example, our last example, should be the one that lays the groundwork for that to collapse. But what we see in Islam is quite the opposite. Christianity fought against slavery multiple times. We abolished slavery in England. The first time was in 1068, 1069. That was centuries before Islam ever abolished slavery. In the Islamic world, the slave trade happens today. Now let me ask you this question in closing, because I'm coming to the end of the meeting. Please answer this in your 3 minutes. Are you proud of Muhammad's example, and therefore are you proud that you have the right to own a slave? That's the question I would like you to address. Because as a Christian, using Christ as my example, I could never claim that. So, over to you.
Okay, first of all, when we talk about slavery, we must be very careful that slavery does not manifest itself everywhere the same. Okay? Roman slavery and the rights of the slaves during the Roman times is going to be a totally different reality to the slavery during the Egyptian time. Now, the slavery or the transatlantic slave trade it cannot be compared to the slavery that took place amongst Ottomans. And I'm not saying either of them are better or worse, but I'm just saying the manifestation of it is totally different. Now, when we say slavery, most people think of Africans taken to right? And then that's the backdrop that we have. When we think of the Prophet, we think that he did similar, or that's the slavery that was the manifestation of his time. Now, I can give you an right here how badly people who weren't Arab, people who weren't associated to a particular tribe were treated. The way I understand Islam, my personal Islam and tries to filter out the ills. And equally, if you say to me that a hadith for the Prophet, to your interpretation, encourages having slaves, you also have to then say there are also hadiths for the Prophet discourages slaves and makes manumission or the freeman of slaves a very core activity for people. How does he do that? By telling people that if you free a slave, this is your reward.
I think, in my belief, we are
such and such. Freeing a slave is an equivalent, like you will never be able to repay you will never be able to repay your father unless you free a slave. For example, things like that. There's many things in the Quran is for encouragement of freeing people from this bondage. So Islam comes into a time where, as you said, it's normative. It tries to filter out all the ills of it. However, you need to understand that 7th century Arabia was a place where tribes subjugate and wars. Everyone is fight, and these things are just a reality that did not change during the lifetime of the Prophet.
They have already normalized. If you bring people, that's 1980.
Can I add to him?
No, because we're doing a time limit. So, when you're ready. So, the fact of the matter is, if Islam came to filter out the ill and to build up the good, it has failed. Because in 1400 years, Islam never stopped slavery until it was pressured to, the Islamic world was pressured to by the Western world. It was the Western world that pushed the Islamic world into abolishing slavery. There was no internal movement within the Islamic world to abolish slavery. There never has been, and there never will be. Because if you say that you're going to abolish slavery, you're going to have to say that Muhammad did things that were wrong, and therefore he isn't the best example. Let me just give you some examples of Muhammad. Sahih al-Muslim, book 015, number 4122. Sorry, 4112. Imran B. Hussein reported that a person who had no other property emancipated 6 slaves of his at the time of his death. Allah's messenger, may peace be upon him, called for them and divided them into 3 sections, cast lots amongst them and set 2 free and kept 4 in slavery. No, 1 second, don't interrupt. I did not interrupt you. No, don't interrupt. Don't interrupt.
I don't understand that.
Bro, don't interrupt. I did not interrupt you. Muhammad had people that were set free and he put them back into slavery. That's your example. This is what Muhammad did. Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 3, book 41, hadith number 598. Narrated by Jabir. A man manumitted, that means to release, manumitted a slave, and he had no other property than that. So the Prophet cancelled the manumission. He cancelled the release of the slave and had him brought back into slavery and sold the slave for him. Here's another example of Muhammad, narrated by Anas bin Malik in Sahih Bukhari, volume 8, book 80, number 753. The Prophet said, The freed slave belongs to the people who have freed him. So even when you're set free, you're still owned in the wider context by the slave owners. The reality is that Christians were fighting against slavery in the classical period. They would sell. Yeah, I'll give you some examples. In my next 3 minutes, I'll give you examples. We abolished slavery in England in the 10th century. In the 10th century, that's when the Islamic slave trade was ramping up. You talked about Janissaries and the Ottoman Empire. Let me tell you what it looked like for my people, the Christian peoples of Eastern Europe. The Ottoman Turk would ride in and demand our children. Can you imagine someone coming up to you and saying, "Give me your child as a payment for a tax"? Because they couldn't pay the jizya tax, the Ottoman Turk, the Ottoman Muslim, came into Christian villages and took their children as payment. And who else did that? Muhammad did that, and I'll show you that as well. Now let me ask you that. Do you agree with taking people and distributing them as the possessions amongst the believers? So you've got two questions. Are you proud of your right to own another human being as a piece of property? Are you proud of it? 2, do you agree with the idea of distributing people amongst the believers as possessions like your prophet did?
Okay. How long is left? 3.5.
Have I still got a bit of time? Okay, your turn.
Okay. So he asked me if I am proud to own slaves, right? That's what you said.
You're proud of your right to own slaves.
Right to own slaves. Okay, good. Okay, and then you also said that the second question was, can you say that?
The second question was, do you agree with the idea of taking human beings and distributing them amongst the believers as property like your prophet did?
Okay, so my understanding of Islam and its law and the way it's understood is not static. So I'm not someone who believes that because there was a time where people were doing that I have to necessarily do that, and that's somehow my attendance of me entering paradise. That's not what Islam for me is. I look at Islam and I understand Islam in a context of the zeitgeist I'm living in. I live right now in the UK. I'm originally from Africa. I live in the UK, and listen, you chill, bro. Now, of course, you're gonna have things like that, uninformed, ignorant statements like there's only one Islam. But when you look at the classical scholars and contemporary scholars, they come to different conclusions because there's additional information, there are changes in politics, changes in the way people perceive certain things, and that's how I see that. So your question is anachronistic in a way, because you are now forcing me to go back to the 7th century and sort of apply that to my life, when the context of the 7th century I don't live in. So that's how I would answer that.
1 minute.
The other thing that you're saying as well is that your problem clearly is that the Prophet Muhammad SAW was owning slaves, right? And again, I look at it in terms of a believer, first and foremost, but I also look at it as in terms of a historian. That's what was happening at that time, right? And the other thing that you were saying about Islam failed because it never abolished slavery. Now, I've never claimed that Islam came to abolish slavery, but it came to regulate, possibly, and to get rid of the ills as much as possible, as much as society allows it to happen. And and kudos to the Christians and the Quakers who got rid of slavery. But
okay, time. Time, right.
Yeah.
So let us be clear.
Yeah.
You're ducking, And I don't blame you.
That's fine if you think that's your
Because
interpretation.
I didn't interrupt you. Don't interrupt me. You're ducking because you can't just stand here and say you're proud of Muhammad.
I can say that. Of
No,
course.
well, I didn't interrupt you.
Yeah.
You had the opportunity to say that you're proud of your right to own slaves, and you didn't. Because Muhammad.
Why do I have to do that?
Why are you interrupting?
Yeah, no.
Why are you interrupting?
Yeah.
I didn't interrupt you. Can I start my 3 minutes again, please? Okay. So you had the opportunity to stand here and said, I am proud of the rights that Muhammad gives to me to own another human being as a piece of property. But you didn't. And the reason why you didn't, bro, is because your conscience is better than the conscience of your prophet. And I don't blame you. But that should be telling you something. If you can't look at Muhammad and say the liberties that he has given me, I am proud of, and the restrictions that he has given me, I am proud of, then he's not worth following. I can stand here and say that I am proud of Jesus Christ. And I am proud of the example that he gives me. Where he gives me liberty, I want to live in that liberty. Where he gives me restriction, I want to live in that restriction. And that is a better example to you. Because I am yet to find a person that can find a problem with Jesus. But I find plenty of problems with Muhammad. That's actually the reason why I rejected Islam and became a Christian. The reason why I became a Christian is because a Muslim tried to convert me to Islam, and when I compared Muhammad to Jesus,
Why you ignore the
pause my time, please.
Matthew 15, 22, 28, where the Canaanian woman was
Sorry.
referred to her as a
We're
dog,
just gonna have to wait until he's
as a
finished.
dog. And this is he's talking about Jesus in another place. Jesus talking to people, he loved only the Jew, and he called non-Jew dogs and pigs. He ignores that, and he don't like to be interrupted, but he can interrupt and tell you to shut up. Please carry on.
Okay, so we'll start my time again. And please
No,
note
not again.
No, let him start again. Let him.
So-
But let him take
No,
consideration.
not again. We'll have you pause
Answer
it.
this. Matthew 15, 22, 28. Exactly 26, where he said to the woman, it's not right to take
Bro, can you stop
the
being rude?
children bread.
Can you
I
stop
am
being
rude. No, you
Okay,
told me.
So,
Uh,
as I was saying, I look at Jesus, and where he gives me liberty, I want to follow in that liberty.
Yeah.
Where he gives me restraint, I want to follow in that restraint. And I can stand here and say I'm 100% behind that. So I'll ask you again, are you proud of your right to own another human being as a piece of property?
Yeah.
Now, furthermore, there are hadiths where Muhammad took people that were captured in war and distributed them amongst the believers. Are you
Yeah.
aware of those hadiths?
Yeah, I am.
Am I lying about that?
No.
No, those are
they
real
will do
things.
the same
So
for-
Muhammad
the
did
non-Muslims,
that.
they will do the
Do
same
you
with
believe-
women,
do
with
you
Muslim
believe
women.
that you
If they-
have the
they,
right,
have to
that
win.
Muslims have the right to take other human beings and distribute
The
them as
non-Muslim will do the
property
same for the
amongst
Muslim women.
the believers
If
when you
they
are
are to
victorious
be
in war. That's
win
another
in a
question.
battle.
Now,
This
you'll
is
have to
my
forgive
answer
me
for
because
you.
He wasn't interrupting you, he's just interrupting
No, I'm
you.
interrupting you
So,
because
my point,
the rule go
my
on
point,
Muslim and non-Muslim.
My point
and you should take
is
it in
that
consideration.
I gave 9 theses as to why I reject Islam.
Yeah.
The example of Muhammad is one of them. The other example we've already alluded to, which is that Islam claims to solve society's problems. But it couldn't even solve the problem of slavery, even when it had 1400 years to do so, and even when it controlled huge tracts of land without any real opposition.
You don't think
the
that-
Islamic
let me
empires
interrupt him. Let me
stood for
interrupt him.
over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
They were the dominant force, and they couldn't stop slavery. But at the same period, Christians were stopping slavery in their lands, even before Islam. In the Byzantine Empire, in the 5th century, slavery was being stopped. In England, in the 11th century, slavery was being stopped.
Tell him the
In
Prophet, he
Italy,
wasn't
in
the king,
France,
and he come
at
and
the
tra-
same
tribal,
time that the Islamic
tribal
empires
time,
were
and he-
ramping up
during
their
the
slave
23
trade,
years, that's why
the
the
Christian
chief of
kingdoms
he was
were
a
abolishing
kind of, he was
slavery.
accused and
And that
he
is
was trying to
because
kill him.
Islam
Because he's bringing
failed to
equality,
deal
and
with
he
slavery,
encouraged,
whereas
to remove
Christianity
it.
did deal with slavery.
You
Now,
answer me.
Okay. That's it now. Five.
Is it 3 minutes?
8.
So my final point.
Yeah.
So my two questions again.
Yeah.
One, are you proud
Yeah.
of your right to own another human being as a piece of property? This brother says yes. And two, do you agree with the right to take people you've captured in war and distribute them as property to the believers?
Yeah. Okay. Now, this man is asking me a question and he wants a particular answer. He wants me to say, yes, I'm proud. Proud of what? Proud of owning slaves. Now, I've already explained to you, look, the way you understand Islam is not the way I understand Islam, okay?
Can you shut up and don't interrupt him?
Pause
Okay.
his time.
Can you shut up? Yeah, shut up.
When you're
because
ready,
he's
just ask him to start.
Now,
I will shut my fucking mouth if you shut as well. You fucking idiot.
Carry on. Yeah.
now that's what you were talking.
Just talk to them.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Bob, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, Bob, I've already said to you, my answer is nuanced. I'm saying to you, yeah, that you are asking me to answer a question that is extremely specific. You are talking about the Prophet Muhammad SAW owning slaves, live in the 7th century, having to fight tribes, having to fight enemies, having to defend people, having to go to battle. I've never been in a battle. I've never been into a battle, right? I've never been amongst groups.
Keep going.
I've never been amongst groups who've done such things. Now, I can't answer that. I can't say I'm proud of that because it does not apply to my life. Now, if we were in a time, okay, where there would be battles and wars and tribes fighting and I happen to be a Muslim and the conditions are there for me to be there, I would probably answer in affirmative. I'd be like, look, this is the context that I live in. This is what happens in war. Yes, I am proud. Besides that, I am proud of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu for who he is and for what he stands for. The second question, what was the second question? Sorry, what was the second question? The second question was...
Do you believe that
distribution.
captured people in war can be distributed
Yeah.
as property to the believers?
Okay,
Muslim believers.
Okay, you see, that's a very nuanced question that you're asking me. Now, we live in a time today where there's international laws, where there's sovereign countries. When you say that, are you saying a sovereign country going to another sovereign country and doing that? Or are you saying that I'm part of a vigilante group like ISIS and then I insert myself in the Middle East when there's a vacuum because there's a civil war, I happen to be a part of that group, then I would say no. So you see, the question that you're asking me are very nuanced. Because we live, again, because it's specific to the time that we live in. I live in a place where there's nation states, the economical blocks like the EU and America and China, where there's international laws that rule now. Now, if you ask me now, I can't, unless I'm part of a vigilante group that I disagree with from the get-go. So that's how I'm going to answer, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry.
Can I reply? Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Ready when you are?
Apologies for interrupting.
It's all right, don't worry about it. What's your name, bro?
Dawuud.
Dawuud, as we can see, is weaving. And I don't blame him. I asked him a very simple question. Muhammad gives Dawuud the right to own another human being as a piece of property, and he doesn't want to say he is proud of the right that Muhammad gave to him. And the reason, but the brother behind him is proud. Either way, we have a problem. Either way, we have a problem. If you are stood here or can hear my voice, any human being who says that he is proud of the right to own another human being has a conscience that is deformed from the good. They have a conscience that is corrupted and evil. And if you agree with me, then you disagree with Muhammad, because Muhammad gave you that right. Now, you said that you can't ask me to be proud of something in the 21st century that was applicable in the 7th century. But the reality is, the whole point of Islam is that we go back to a 7th century Arab and say that he is the best example to follow and imitate him in what he does in his implementation of the Quran. So let's look at what the Quran says. Here's something that the Quran says. Quran 33, ayah 50. O Prophet, indeed we have made lawful to you your wives, to whom you have given their due compensation, and, did everyone hear the and? And means in addition to, so more than your wives, also permitted to you are those your right hands possess. That is a phrase that is talking about slaves. So permitted for the Muslims to have sex with are their wives and their slave women. The Quran is said by Muslims like Dawuud to be an eternal book, a guidance to the whole of mankind, which means that this is something applicable to the 21st century. So I will ask you again, Dawuud, according to the guidance of the Quran, not the example of a 7th century nomadic prophet, but the Quran's statement that you can own people with your right hand as a possession. Are you proud of what the Quran says that you can do? By contrast, Christianity does not sanction slavery. And why is that? How many minutes have I got? Have I done? I'll have to come back to it.
Okay, look, and this is actually for the viewers, right? Because what has happened for a very long time is that we have loads of people who like to talk about things, right? And I think it reflects the politics in this country at this very time as well. That we have lay people and incredibly huge, knowledge or Islam, history, sociology, all these things been democratically open so that everyone can talk about it, and nuances don't exist anymore, and we live in a time of absolutes, and that's probably why populism is doing is alive and well. Now, for the people who are actually interested in how Islam is practiced and how scholars traditionally have applied laws, okay? The Quran is a book that we believe is from God, and it came down as revelation, and it's in response to, or a reaction and react, and it's sometimes proactive, sometimes it's reactive. Now, what I'm trying to say to him like the last 3 minutes is that if you asked me today, slavery, let's define what slavery is. Slavery is a system. Slavery predicates a system. There has to be a system. Now you're asking, okay, a African man who is in the UK, whether he would be proud to own a slave. I'm telling you, I don't even have the environment, there's not even an environment for me to have slaves. Okay, I'm an average guy. I'm not saying that slavery does not exist. It does exist in its life in the world. But I'm saying I am an average guy. I live in a system where there's no slavery. There's no need for slavery. There is a leeway for me as a Muslim to say, you know what? I don't need, and I'm not in need of slavery, nor do I condone slavery, and it doesn't make me any less Muslim. The Islamic law, the Sharia that you were talking about earlier on, is an extremely flexible system that adapts to its environment, in its context, and its zeitgeist. And that's something that once we can understand that, then I'm not, like you want to pin me down, to static understanding on how jurisprudence is understood. Jurisprudence is a study, is an area that is live or not static.
I think it's important to see this, because these are real people really going for this.
forget about the word ISIS.
What I'm saying, at the time
Sorry.
of the Prophet,
Okay.
if
I'll hold
the
that book
other tribe
for a moment.
who
Can
was
I hold that book?
fighting
In my
against
next
the
3
Prophet,
minutes, I'll hold that book.
and they took Muslim women as
So my 3
as a
minutes
spoil
now.
for war, they will use them to wait.
Notice that Dawuud said how the scholars apply it traditionally. For 1400 years there has been an Islamic slave trade and it has never ended. Ever. Ever. Islam failed. If you say that slavery was wrong and Islam came to abolish that which was wrong, then Islam is a failure because Islam never abolished the slave trade. By contrast, and it didn't just fail in its failure to get rid of the slave trade, it failed in the caliphate. The caliphate doesn't even exist anymore. The reality is Dawuud, when he suits him, is saying, I don't want to follow Muhammad's example. And when it doesn't suit him, he says he wants to follow Muhammad's example. By contrast, Christians like Saint Ovidius would sell, this is in the classical period, so this is in the Roman period, would sell themselves into slavery and then would use the money that they raised to free slaves. Christians like the Mennonite brothers, during the European slavery, went to the Caribbean to preach the gospel to slaves. They wanted to sell themselves into slavery so that they could share the suffering of the slaves. Now, regardless of these individual examples that we can point to, it boils down to the paradigm of Muhammad or Jesus. Jesus never had slaves and he is my example. The Old Testament talks about slavery, much like the Quran talks about slavery. But we Christians understand the Bible through a covenant paradigm, which means that the old covenant law doesn't carry into the new covenant law, except and as the new covenant law transforms and embraces it. And nowhere in the new covenant can slavery be justified. However, Islam in the Quran, verse after verse, justifies slavery. Muhammad justifies slavery. That is the example that Dawuud faces. And his conscience is telling him that it isn't Muhammad that is the best example, but that it is Jesus Christ. History tells us that the caliphate set up by Muhammad doesn't exist anymore, but the church founded by Jesus does. So that which was established by Jesus has stood the test of time, and that which was established by Muhammad has not stood the test of time.
Are we done? Okay, so first of all, you said something at the beginning. You said that so Islam came and it has basically failed to abolish slavery in 1,400 years, and it's still going on. Well, if I was to use the same example that you're using, then Christianity has failed, because we actually know today that global slavery and human trafficking is as big as it's never been, and there's various societies who are involved in it. In North America alone, which today prides itself to be based upon Christian Judeo values, has thousands and thousands of children being kidnapped into sex trafficking, which is a form of slavery also. So based upon that, but I'm not using it, I'm just using it to show you how he rationalizes. I don't rationalize like that. I'm not going to say Christianity has failed because of that. You keep going back to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire approximately existed for 1,000 years or 900 years, don't quote me on that, and ceased to exist for like less than 200 years. Now that's your equivalent of what's it called? A nation or an empire failing. And again, it shows me really that you're illiterate when it comes to history and your understanding of history, that empires do exist, they come back, and they exist in different forms. Now, the other thing that you need to understand is this. There's a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad actually prophesied it. He said, there will come a time where you will have a king, and then you will have a ruler, and then you will have politicians ruling. And I'm just paraphrasing this hadith. The hadith basically is commenting on what? It's commenting on different types of governance that the Muslims will live unto the day of judgment. So we were foretold that there will that the caliphate, the way we know it, will cease to exist. So yeah, that's one thing. So to say that Islam has failed, and first of all, I've never claimed ever before Islam came to abolish. The word abolishing means cease to exist, an effort to remove slavery. Why? Because with history, you will find, and it seems like we're going back in history again with the wave of far-right politics that has taken hold of countries in Europe, especially in this country. You will see that in history, it's not a linear understanding of history, rather it's secular. So things that might not apply today, where there is no wars and there's no civil wars and there's no slavery, could be looking different in 50 years. And Islam, like I said to you, is this. It's a religion that comes to weed out the evil and to regulate human conditions that we cannot deny.
So let me reply to this.
Yeah.
Because he keeps trying to talk about politics. And the reality is there is no more sort of white flag signal than when someone tries to draw in politics when we're talking about the religious system. We're talking about the example of Muhammad and the example of Jesus and the paradigms that those establish. Muslims, as he has just admitted, have not abolished slavery. They haven't come to abolish slavery. Islam isn't here to abolish slavery. Islam permits him to have slaves. Islam permits him to have slaves. And in terms of having those slaves, what we have is a problem. We have a problem of a system that will license the owning of other human beings as a moral good. Let me give you an example, quoting another hadith, another example of Muhammad. And I want you to commentate on this example. So among them was a woman from the Banu Fazara. She was wearing a leather coat. With her was her daughter, who was one of the prettiest girls in Arabia. I drove them along until I brought them to Abu Bakr, who bestowed that girl upon me as a prize. So we arrived in Medina. I had not yet disrobed her. This is one of Muhammad's followers. I had not yet disrobed her when the messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, met me in the street and said, "Give me that girl, O Salama." I said, "O messenger of Allah, she has fascinated me. I had not yet disrobed her." When on the next day the messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, again met me in the street, he said, "O Salama, give me that girl. May God bless your father." I said, "She is for you, messenger of Allah. By Allah, I have not yet disrobed her." The messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, sent her to the people of Mecca and surrendered her as a ransom for a number of Muslims who had been kept as prisoners at Mecca. Now please notice that the Muslim is appealing to Muhammad for the permission to disrobe his captured slave. The woman had just seen her fathers and her brothers and her cousins die, her people destroyed, her relatives enslaved. Do you think she wanted to have sex with him? Do you agree with Muhammad when he brought people back into slavery who had been released from slavery and used human beings as part of wider diplomatics?
Okay, So basically, he said to just before he started, he said, "Why is it that I bring politics into it? Why am I bringing all these other elements that?"
Okay, we'll make this the last round.
Yeah. So he just said to me, what he said to the camera just a minute ago, why is it that I'm bringing all these other elements to this debate? I'm doing this because reality is just that complex. Humans, human history, and events are not just purely driven on theology, which obviously he's banking on. There's politics that is involved in it, and there are other things that are involved in it. And that's why I'm bringing these things, because it's just that holistic. Secondly, those hadiths that you mentioned before, just by the sound of it, because you brought this hadith without an explanation and you just left it there, I find them extremely strange. I find them extremely strange hadiths, and I do not know the authenticity of it. So I cannot comment on it. The other thing that you said was that I find a fallacy. You said that you've mentioned all these classical Christians who were freeing slaves, but yet in the 15th century, you still have slavery, persistent by Christians. In the 18th century, 19th century, in this country, husbands were selling their women on the streets of England, and that's less than 300 years ago. So yes, you can be. We celebrate what humankind has achieved, and totally. And I don't see this as a West and East divide. That's not how I understand history. History is an obligation of societies and influences like politics that you're trying to run away from. I'm just saying to the viewer, look, understand reality holistically. What he's doing is dog whistling. He's throwing all these things and he keeps going back to these points. But he doesn't actually go on to what I'm saying. When I was trying to explain to you, for example, the nuance on how classical scholars, contemporary scholars, even lawmakers, secular lawmakers, when they make laws, how nuanced their approach is when they pass laws.
My reply?
Yes.
Okay. Just changing the battery.
1 minute.
Oh, you still have one
All
minute.
right,
Okay.
wait. Let me see about it. You can
Sure.
show me the minute, yeah? All right, sure.
Now, this man over here, he brought a book where there was ISIS on it. And this is what I'm trying to say.
No. I bought a book for a woman.
Yeah.
A Yazidi woman.
Yeah. They will see.
A Yazidi woman. Yeah.
Sure.
And I
Thank you
also-
very much.
Brother, let him finish,
And I-
please.
And I also said,
Please.
I also said, I'm not worried about the name. I'm saying these are real people.
That's fine. Understand. No. Please, we're in a debate. I just pointed at you.
One more thing.
No.
Just
Please.
like the women in Muhammad's time, this is a real woman.
No. Thank you very much. So, this is the perfect example. Sorry, did you pause it because he interrupted? This is the example that I'm trying to say why. No, I just pointed at you.
Just give him a
at the
minute.
book, and I
Just
want to
give him a
explain why your understanding of this situation.
Bro, just go on. Give him a minute.
Yeah. Why this book and his understanding of what is happening in the Middle East is limited and it's not holistic enough. Now, ISIS or whatever, call what you want, is a vigilante group that is not supported by no government. In fact, there are certain people who say they're supported by Western and other entities in the Middle East as proxy wars, right? These things are not happening under state-ruled or state-sanctioned activities. These are groups just like neo-Nazis with an ammunition power of an army who go into places and enslave human beings and kill human beings. And those people, let's not isolate that it was only the Yazidi women who were being killed here. There's plenty of Muslim or enslaved, even that. But there are also millions, upon millions of Muslim who've been killed by these groups. Now we have to distinguish that this group.
So I'm going to do a wrap up.
Yeah.
Because Dawuud is trying to conflate politics with religion. What I am pointing out is the politics of Muhammad. This is the politics of Muhammad. Muhammad had the opportunity to abolish slavery. Muhammad had the opportunity to tell his followers, free all your slaves. Muhammad had the opportunity to say it is not permissible to you to buy or sell slaves. I mean, he did it with alcohol.
And bacon.
And he did it with bacon. If you can do it with alcohol and bacon, you can do it with human beings. But he didn't. And he didn't because it didn't suit him to do so. And the fact is that for 1400 years, since the time of Muhammad, Muslims have dominated the Arabian Peninsula. It's not like the Byzantines successfully invaded it or the Crusaders successfully invaded it. The Muslims owned it all to themselves for 1400 years, and in the entirety of that time, they never stopped slavery. Why? Because they had no legitimate reason to from an Islamic perspective. But every single century, I can point to Christians fighting against slavery, including in the time when Christians were committing slavery. Christians abolished slavery in this country, Dawuud, in the 11th century.
So why did it continue?
It started again. It's something different. Because of the Enlightenment. Because Christians in Europe started to abandon their faith. And as they started to abandon their faith because of the Enlightenment, that's when you see slavery start again. It's as Europe moves away from Christianity that you start to see slavery re-emerge. If you knew European history, you would know that, but you don't.
It's factually not correct.
It's factually correct.
All the
It is factually correct. I did not interrupt
all the
you.
Protestants
I did not interrupt you.
In the 16th century, were Christians. who
I
took
did not
slaves.
interrupt you.
What history are you talking about? Sorry,
So, my point to you is, Dawuud, you've asked on multiple occasions. Are you proud of the rights that Muhammad gave you? You dodged the question.
I've answered it.
Well, the cameras will see. I had to ask you multiple times. You haven't answered that question. I am proud of the example of Jesus. Every right that he has given me, I want to celebrate and do. And everything that he has prohibited me, I want to stop doing. Muhammad gave Muslims the right to own other people as property according to Sharia law, and you couldn't say you were proud of that, and that is your conscience telling you you need a better prophet, and his name is Jesus.
Why are you not actually saying what I said to you? It's like almost ignoring it. It's not good
Tell
enough.
me you're proud. Tell me you're proud of the right to own people as property.
But why?
Can you please, this is about slavery. Can you please read about it?
Yeah, next week you can talk to him. Look,
Tell me you're proud of it.
Look.
Tell me you're
why-
proud to own another
Why are
human
you
being as a
setting
piece of property.
criteria for me? Why are you setting criteria? Why am I supposed to follow your criteria
Okay.
to begin with?
This is an Islamic criteria.
Huh?
Muhammad gave you the right to
Yeah.
own another human being as a piece of property.
Okay.
Are you proud of that right?
So if I don't do it, I'm not a Muslim. Is that what you're implying?
No, I'm just asking you if you're proud of it.
No, but that's what I'm trying to say to you. I'm saying to you, it's not necessary for me to
Are
be proud
you
of it.
proud of the
It's
right?
not necessary for me. It does not make me a Muslim. It does not define my religion and my belief to God.
So Muhammad
It's
doesn't
not
define your
necessary.
religion.
It's not necessary.
Muhammad doesn't define your religion.
Slavery and its laws that came with it are reactionary.
You have just said Muhammad.
provisional.
You have just said
Yeah.
that it is not necessary to your religion.
It's not necessary for me to believe
Is
that I'm supposed to
Muhammad
have a
is
slave.
Muhammad your normative example?
Yeah.
Did Muhammad have slaves?
Yeah, but
Did Muhammad trade in
but
slaves?
Muhammad had the Prophet Muhammad had also 7 wives. Am I allowed to have 7 wives because of that? No.
Are you permitted to have slaves?
I am if I live in a context where it is, I am, yes.
Are you proud of that right?
Why should I be proud of it if it's not applying to me?
Brother, can't you hear your conscience?
It's
the
not my
reason why you
conscience, it's not
can't
my-
say it is
No.
because your conscience is telling you you need a better prophet.
Okay, no, I'm not saying that. Look, I'm just trying to explain to you is this. Look, I've already actually answered your question. I said, look, if I live in a scenario where it's normative, then yes, of course I'm going to be proud.
And
I'm
who
not
makes it normative?
I'm not going to society.
And what dominates that society if it's Islamic?
Well, it's not just Islamic.
No, hold on.
It's not just Islamic.
If you've just said society normalizes it,
Yeah,
I agree
yeah,
with you.
yeah.
So if Islam is the dominant force in society,
Yeah.
then slavery becomes normative.
Possibly, not always.
Right, do you not see a problem with that?
Well, why? What would
You,
I see a
you
problem
talked
with that?
about ISIS. You said that they're this rogue vigilante group.
Yeah.
They had slaves. The Ottoman Empire had slaves.
Yeah.
Muhammad had slaves. Do you see the line there?
Yeah.
So when ISIS do it, is it wrong?
It's wrong because
When the Ottomans do it, is it wrong?
no, but hold on. Are you comparing ISIS
No,
to the
no.
Ottomans?
Yes.
How?
When I'm on slavery. When
Not on
ISIS,
slavery, because
no, you don't know. I'm doing it using slavery. When ISIS kidnapped Christians and had them as slaves, is it wrong or right?
it was wrong.
When the Ottoman Empire kidnapped Christians and made them slaves, is it wrong or right?
There's probably some cases where it was wrong. Yes.
Probably. So there are
Some
some
cases,
cases
some
where
cases.
it was right. Right. So there you go. That's the problem of Islam. And why do you say it's right? Because when Muhammad did it, was it right or wrong? When Muhammad did it, was it right or wrong?
I'm saying that. I'm saying.
When Muhammad did it,
Let me answer the
Dawuud,
first question
was
with
it
the
right or
Ottomans.
wrong?
Let me ask you the Ottomans.
You did. You said it was right.
Yeah, but let me explain why. The reason why is because the Ottomans was an autonomous state that was respected throughout the globe.
No, they weren't respected. They were hated.
Yes, they were.
They were hated.
They were respected throughout the
They
globe.
were hated.
So you're telling me of all these travelogues of these diplomats who went to the Ottoman period are like what made up?
The Ottomans were seen as enemy
That's
of
possible.
countless cultures,
That's
of countless
possible.
peoples. They were a despised empire
Well, that's
because they were a
No,
despicable
that's not
empire.
true. So what? That's not true. So what
What
about?
about the Roman
So
Empire?
so what about
They was love?
hold on, what about Elizabethan England then? Queen Elizabeth, she was in alliance with the Moroccans, who in turn were in alliance with the Ottomans. So that's what I'm trying to say. You have to be very careful how you portray history. Another thing, the Ottomans weren't possibly not liked because they're the enemy or they're rivals. Who likes their rivals anyway? But that doesn't take away.
We're talking
that
about
doesn't, that doesn't
the
take
Ottoman
away.
slave trade.
No, hold on.
That's what we're
We
talking
can't
about.
just talk about
Why
one
do you
thing
want
in
to talk about
isolation.
everything?
No, why? Do you know why?
ISIS
No,
do it, it's
hold on,
wrong.
hold on.
The Ottomans
Let him
do it,
finish
it's right.
his point.
The reason why I'm not talking about isolated elements like a system like slavery is because slavery predicates not only on slavery itself. Slavery is a system that is based upon it's supported by church, it's supported by
By the
governments,
caliphate.
and it's supported by policymakers.
By Muhammad.
You said that
Muhammad was a policymaker.
You said that slavery.
Muhammad was a policymaker.
Stick to the Ottomans.
Thank you very much. You said that Christianity or that slavery emerged with the Enlightenment period. Now explain to me. In 1659, when the first settlers settled in the south of North America, Protestant settlers, Pietism was their religion. Calvinists, who owned slaves. The founding fathers, deeply religious men, who believed that it was the natural cause to own slaves. Now, am I going to pin this back to Christianity? I'm not doing that. Because
But
the
I
way-
am pinning it back to Muhammad.
that's
Yeah,
fine.
I pin it-
Muhammad had
That's-
slaves.
Allow me to
One
pin it
second.
back to your
One
Christianity.
second. No, one
because
second.
according to your
Mr.
Bible,
Bean, Yahya,
no,
don't
you
force your
talk
way
too
into this
much
conversation.
and you cut everybody
talking
out.
to Dawuud.
You know, I can
Talking
give
to Dawuud.
you.
Dawuud. You
Luke
said when
12,
ISIS had slaves, it was
47,
wrong.
48. Luke
When the Ottoman
12,
Empire,
Why?
when the Ottoman Empire
12,
had slaves,
47,
you
48.
said on some occasions
Timothy.
it was okay.
1
Now let's
Timothy
round this up.
6,
When Muhammad had
verse 1,
slaves, was it
2.
right or wrong?
When Muhammad had slaves, it was right, yeah.
So when Muhammad took slaves
Ephesians.
back into slavery that their masters had released, was that right or wrong?
I
5.
do not, I don't agree.
Ephesians
I don't know,
6:5.
that hadith sounds very
You don't
strange.
agree, do you?
No, the hadith
In
sounds
your
very
heart,
strange. The hadith sounds
Dawuud,
strange.
they're Sahih Muslim and Sahih Al-Bukhari.
Exodus.
So what? So what?
Now, so what?
21,
Do you remember one of my
7,
other reasons? 1 second.
11.
So, right, let's just move back a bit. Let's just move back a bit.
Leviticus
Move back. Come with me,
25,
Dawuud.
44, 46.
Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Right. There we go. Dawuud, let's just get this clear, right? You're saying. Remember, one of my other reasons for rejecting Islam is that even when we use Sahih Hadith, like Sahih Muslim and Sahih Al-Bukhari, yeah, that I said, you remember because you were listening in, I know you were.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, I said that we see Muslims chuck those hadith under the bus. I quoted Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Muslim about Muhammad taking slaves back into slavery. And you want to reject Sahih hadith. And the reason why you want to
I don't
reject
want to do
Sahih
that.
hadith, But that's what you're doing.
Because
No,
Quran
that is what you're
encourage-
doing.
Those particular ones, I do not know.
Exactly,
Because
exactly.
I do not know.
You're
The Quran
embarrassed by your own
encourage-
No, I
hadith.
don't know. I don't know.
They
Because-
are Sahih Muslim, Sahih al-Bukhari.
Bukhari
Either
came
throw
200
them
years after
away
the Prophet
and
died.
throw Muhammad along with them, or embrace them and say you're proud of the example of Muhammad. But Muhammad,
The Prophet
Muhammad,
encouraged free
Muhammad
and slavery.
took slaves back into slavery that had been released
This
by their
contradiction
masters.
to the
Was
Quran,
that
which
right
is
or
wrong.
wrong?
Okay.
It's wrong.
Okay.
It's wrong. Because Quran
You need Jesus, Yahweh.
Encourage,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
encourage
Yahweh.
free as a
May I
slave.
say something?
And that's why the Prophet
you
was
basically said to me
fought
that
by others.
Habibi,
No, Habibi.
look, this man knows your name.
I was supposed to talk to him,
I
and
know,
you
but
come
he-
along,
yeah, and he
and
didn't
he
wanna-
just,
he didn't wanna-
he's
He
just
just both wanna
using
talk, so that's the
using you for whatever
Come
he
on, Dawuud.
wants.
You just have to go, press on with the heckle.
Yeah, press on.
I do it every
Yeah.
week.
Okay, you said
Yeah.
a Sahih hadith, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now I don't know if you know this. You probably know, maybe not. Look, the hadith. Have you checked the isnad?
Are you about to
No,
say
no,
that?
hold on. Have you checked the isnad of the thing?
Right, a Sahih hadith.
No.
Dawuud, Dawuud.
Don't care.
Please answer what I said to you. Did you check the isnad of the hadith?
No, I trust Bukhari and Muslim.
Okay. Did you know?
Did Sahih a Muslim check the isnad?
No. Did you know?
Did
Did
Bukhari
you-
and Muslim check the isnad?
Okay, but did you know that also? Yeah, there are certain.
I'm so sorry to disturb you guys. I'm going to pray. Can you keep an eye on the store?
Did you know that there are well-established hadith that everyone says is sahih? It's in Muslim and it's in Bukhari.
Yeah.
And then when you go into the, isnad and you see, oh, it's disconnected. So I
Don't you see that proves my point?
No, it doesn't prove your point.
What was
Let
my
me
point
finish,
about
let
the
me
hadith?
finish.
Go on,
Let me
Dawuud.
finish.
Go on. Sorry.
The point I'm trying to
I
make.
apologise.
Yeah.
Now I apologise.
Back to the Ottomans. Me and Riza.
The point I'm trying to make is the hadith, yeah, on its own itself sounds strange because I know that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would encourage, plenty of times in the seerah you find that he would encourage the manumission of slaves, himself freeing slaves. Aisha Radhanha, she's known to have freed 200 slaves just on her own, Aisha. Now, I find the hadith strange. I'm not saying it's not true, okay? I'm not saying you lying, I'm just saying I find it strange. Therefore, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and do my homework, right? So, there was something else that you said, I forgot, sorry.
Okay, so let me reply to what you're saying. Because you're proving another point. If you remember when you were listening in, I said that Muslims can't agree about which hadiths are reliable. And
Yeah,
that
to an extent.
even when
To an extent.
we use the hadiths that they say are reliable, like the Sahih hadiths, which are checked by Bukhari and Muslim, who check the isnads and check the matin and do the whole hadith science, that even today Muslims will chuck those hadiths under the bus. They will distance themselves from those hadiths because they find them embarrassing or they find them against their own conscience. And that is what Dawuud is doing right now. He is distancing himself from Sahih Muslim hadith and Sahih Bukhari hadith, in which Muhammad told that slaves who had been released by their masters needed to be taken back into slavery. And the reason why he is doing so, Dawuud, is because you are a better man than your prophet, and you know that if these hadiths are true, then Muhammad was a horrible man, and you don't want to be a horrible man, and I applaud you for it, but I say that you should follow that logic out of Islam to a better example, the paradigm of Jesus Christ.
Same Jesus.
Because
People
if you're
take them
saying
down.
that even your Sahih hadiths you cannot trust,
No, I don't say that.
Hadith is not holy.
you're saying that
The
they
Quran
sound
is holy.
suspicious.
Yeah, that sounds strange.
Right, but the point of the matter is,
Oh, no.
my friend, these are hadith. This is your literature I'm using.
The hadith comes 200 years after the
Identified
death
by
of Prophet.
your
It might be
scholars
false.
that you say were the amazing people who collected these hadiths, and they're called Sahih for a reason. What
The
does
whole-
Sahih
book
mean
is
for the
Sahih, not
camera?
every single hadith.
Authentic, isn't it? Like,
Authentic.
Authentic,
But-
trustworthy.
Yeah, but some
There
of
you
them,
go,
they
but you
are
don't
not.
want to trust it, do
There
you?
are
Not all of them. There's 7,000 hadith.
I'm talking to
You cannot-
Dawuud.
I'm talking to you.
what I was saying, yeah?
Yes.
What I was saying is,
There's 7,000
wanna
hadith.
open up a
It's
bit the
impossible
understanding of what
that all
Sahih is
hadith
to this
are
one.
right.
there are different...
There must be false
You know there are different
and
books,
authentic
right?
and
And every scholar has
fabricated.
its, that's why that's the differences, and that's why some people don't agree. Because every scholar has its own methodology and
Even the
tolerance
children,
how
even the
to
children.
look at hadith.
Even the donkeys.
Because they were.
I don't
See, you're getting involved in the argument again, bro.
You don't.
Let,
He's not picking up myself.
okay,
Oh, sorry.
go on.
So I'm not denying the hadith. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not wrong. And I'm not. The reason why I'm saying that they sound strange, I should actually take that back. They don't sound strange, but what they do is they.
Content. Why devil?
From the little knowledge I have, it does not seem consistent with the Prophet. And also they seem very surface-based. What do I mean by that? Every hadith, I would love to read this hadith with commentary, and I would love to read the hadith with its historical context. Okay, what happened? Why did the Prophet say that? All this hadith is saying right now is just telling you there was a situation where there was someone was freeing slaves, and the Prophet came and said, like, no, free those two and those two. That's all it's saying. It's just that. Like, I want to know why and the background maybe, and then I can come back to you and be like, oh, so the hadith, the reason why that was the reason is because those two other slaves were taken forcefully from someone else. You know, I'm speculating. I'm saying that there could be another reason why that happened that way. So I just want to look at the hadith. I'm not denying them. If they're Sahih, we say they're Sahih Bukhari, then they're probably authentic. Yeah, Sahih Muslim. They're probably authentic. But I just want to have a bit more
But
meat.
no, let me
to it.
reply, because what you're saying is,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like the Prophet. It sounds suspect because it doesn't sound like the Prophet.
Not consistent, yeah.
But well, I mean, firstly, that's another problem with the hadith literature is it's full of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
But the second problem with
But
that,
that's due to my
the
knowledge,
second
'cause I don't
problem
know
with
every
that,
hadith.
the second problem with that
Yeah.
is also the Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad practiced slavery.
Yeah.
The Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad tortured people. The Sirat literature, yes, the Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad had people assassinated. The Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad waged war against other people. So if you're going to, and also, Dawuud,
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, if you go and use Sirat literature in the game of trumps with Hadith literature wins over Sirat literature. Hadith literature is what you use to understand the Quran, not Sirat literature.
Yeah.
So your defense is weak. But your defense is also flawed, because what you're really saying is, I don't want to believe that Muhammad is the kind of person that would take a slave back into slavery after he's been freed by his master. But anyone who does real history goes off what the sources say. And those sources say that there was a master who owned slaves and he let them go free, and then Muhammad stepped in and he said, no, bring them back into slavery.
Yeah, and I want to know the context of that. That's
So-
all I'm saying. I want to know the context.
The Quran also
Do you
says.
know the context, by the way?
Quran also
doesn't.
says. The Quran also says that you can own women as slaves and have sex with them.
No, never.
That is a right
Never.
given to
Never.
you
This is your wrong
that I read to
introduction.
you.
The right hand possession.
The right hand possession. The right hand possession. Permitted to you are your
I will
wives
leave Islam if
and
it's like this.
those that your right
I
hand
swear I will
possess.
leave Islam.
Clearly, if and those that your right hand
I
possess
swear,
is not
I
also
swear.
your wives,
Yeah.
because that would be naming the
If it's
same
saying
category
the woman
twice,
is here
and that
for
would make
sex,
the Quran
no
guilty
way.
of being just bumble jumble nonsense.
Okay, you know that verse, for example, yeah, what your right hand possess. As someone who lives in the 21st century in London, how would I implement that?
Right, but the reason why you can't implement that is because you live in a society that was influenced by Christians like William Wilberforce,
prove
who
it.
stopped
need to
slavery.
prove.
However,
Hey,
you
scholar,
go to Sudan,
listen to me, I'm talking to
you can do that.
Yeah.
You
Why
go
you
to
tell
Mauritania,
lies?
you
You
can do
always tell
that.
lies.
You go to Saudi Arabia, you can do that. What do those three countries have in common? Because it ain't ethnicity, it ain't language, it ain't economy, it ain't culture.
Well, it's economy.
What's the one thing
That's
that they've
you're
got in
talking
common?
about community,
What's the
bad
one thing
people,
they've got
yeah.
in common?
But not
What
their
religion?
Islam.
There you go. That's the problem.
But then, look, this is what I'm trying to say.
Look at what you've done to
I
the
think
world.
you're brilliant. I think you're brilliant, and I think not brilliant, but you're good, right? I think you're very good. But what I would love you to do, as someone who speaks and someone who wants to be scholarly, you really have to start to apply the holistic thing. When you say, for example, it's just religion, it's not religious. For example, there's a report that came out recently by the BBC, and it looked at slavery in Kuwait. And they were selling. Look, honestly, I'm
Slavery in Kuwait.
They're selling slaves. On Instagram, all these. You can go and have a look on BBC. Yeah, that's accounts.
What's
like
the primary religion of the Kuwait?
No, hold on. Before we go to religion, the report focus on the economy. Now, why is it so?
Because it's the BBC. And the BBC wouldn't blame Islam for anything.
No.
Even a jihad.
But you see, this is what I'm trying to say. I think you have serious blind spots, and I ask Allah to help you to remove them. But the point I brought Kuwait into this is because in Kuwait, the economy permits it. Why? I think every second person has a maid or something. 2 in 4 women have a maid in Kuwait. Now, what? Has that to do with the religion? No, it has to do with the possibility.
Thank you.
Has to do with the possibility and the capabilities that they can afford such things. It's to do with the policies that the government has, the kafaya policies, sponsoring. To have a sponsor and come into the country. So this is what I'm trying to say to you. When you do this, when you just look at the religion, you are just looking at one aspect. And because there's some truth in that aspect, you're misconstruing reality. What I'm asking you to do is like, look, have religion and be critical of religion, but then also look at all the other facets that contribute towards something.
Let me reply to that point.
One last more thing.
Yes, of course.
The last thing is, for example, and you see where the fallacy comes in. You do this the same thing when you want to validate something. You say, for example, Christianity was the driving force that abolished slavery. No, it isn't. If you talk to any historian, they will tell you one of the major reasons, and that's why the government got involved and paid out on reparation to slavers, was because of the economy. The economy changed. Oh, you know what? There are these Quakers. They've been saying for 200 years now to us to abolish slaves. You know what? Time permits it now. Let's pay out all the slavers. Let's pay out all the slavers.
Let me reply.
David Cameron is one of them.
Let me reply.
His family.
Because unfortunately, Dawuud, you don't know church history. I know church history.
Depends. I don't know
The reality is, as far back as the 10th and 11th century, so this is still in feudal times, when the economy was dependent on serfdom, slave labour, Christians were abolishing slavery.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
At the same time, Muslims were enslaving people.
Define what you mean by their
slavery.
abolishing.
The idea that I can own you as a possession and you are my property. That was abolished in numerous Christian countries right from the 5th century onwards. The Byzantine Empire abolished slavery. It abolished
by the state. Or were there people or were there individual saints who were
over the course of church history, both.
But
over
Jesus,
the course of church history,
abolish it. Jesus, he didn't abolish it.
1 second.
And Luke 12:47.
Dawuud,
Jesus
you
confirmed
made a
slavery.
claim. I'm going to have to shout. I'm not shouting at you. I'm just shouting over him.
Yeah.
Right.
I listen.
So you made a claim that I'm being narrow, that I'm only looking at the religious aspect.
Theology, yeah.
But let me just demonstrate why you're wrong in your counter-thesis. Because on numerous occasions in the course of the last hour or two that we've discussed this topic, I have used Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula as an example. Why did I do that? Very deliberately. Because we both know that in terms of what has fashioned the culture, economy and politics of that peninsula since the time of Muhammad, it has been Islam. Which means that in that region of the world, if Islam had the ability and rationale to abolish slavery, you would be able to point to the example of Saudi Arabia as having done so, and at no point at any time has it or have you. It didn't abolish slavery, the Saudi Arabian state, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which I know is not 1400 years old, but my logic stands that area of the world never abolished slavery, either by the direction of a government, either in Damascus or in in Constantinople,
Yeah.
nor by the will of the people, i.e. the people themselves saying, it might be legal for me to do this, but I don't want to do it. Which means that Islam never transformed their hearts to want to do it. Islam failed. It failed culturally. It failed economically. It failed politically. It failed socially. And one example that demonstrates this complete failure is the example of slavery. Where is your caliphate today established by Muhammad?
Okay, look, first of all, I said this at the beginning of this whole debate. I said, look, I am very careful when I make statements, and I will be honest when I see wrong, even amongst the Muslims. I'm not going to hide things here. One thing I want to say is this: the slavery that took place in the West and the slavery that took place in the Western context has its own genealogy and it has its own DNA. It was totally different how it's manifested. Remember I was saying that?
Yeah, you did say that.
I have a picture on my phone that my phone died, okay? And I found that...
We'll just believe you. Go on.
I have this amazing... I found it fascinating. It was a painting of a merchant, an Ottoman merchant, and his slave. And the slave... And the article was about white slavery that many people don't talk about. Yeah, there is such thing as white slavery that took place.
Those of us who know church history know all about the slave trade of the Ottomans.
Yeah.
Because we suffered it.
Yeah. And there's many things that I disagree with what the Ottomans have done. I will say this here. Now, the picture is of the merchant and his slave. And you know what's so funny? You wouldn't be able to tell who the slave is and who the master is. Okay? So when you say things like, well, the Ottomans didn't abolish it, it's because their perception of slavery was totally different. We cannot compare the two.
Yes, we can.
No, we can't. Why not? Look, one reason, I can give you one. Now, you said that slavery was started by the Enlightenment period. Now let me actually correct you and teach you some history that you may not be aware of, not because you're stupid, you're a very intelligent man, but maybe because you're just not aware of it. Pope Nicholas V, he issued a papal in 1492, I think, or 1495. Why was a papal? A papal for the Muslims is an equivalent of a fatwa. And the fatwa was based upon what? It was based upon, and this is what I say, politics. Alfonso V, he was the king of Portugal, approached the Pope in 1492, and he said to the Pope, Pope, the Saracens, who are the Saracens? The Muslims. The animists and the pagans in Africa. They have this gold trade, and they're benefiting from it. He is obviously a politician. You should subjugate them to Christianity. What did the Pope do? The Pope, and it's called the Bull, right? It's very famous. It's a very famous paper. All of you go and Google it. Pope Nicholas V, the papal or the bull. And he issues, and in it, and we have it till this day, he says, and hereby, by the decree, I issue that Alfonso V has the right to go to enslave the Saracens, to enslave the pagan Africans and the animists. And you know what that is? If you know the transatlantic slave trade, you know that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to come to Africa and to torment and to destroy the lives of millions of people. Millions of people. I'm obsessed and I hate ISIS. I say this in the camera. I hate ISIS from my heart. If I could, I would fight against them. Yeah? They've killed 100,000 people. The transatlantic slave trade has killed 12 to 30 million humans, and these are conservative numbers. Now, I've just shown you how.
I'd like to reply to this.
Yeah, I've just shown you how a government, an organization systematically decreed, allowed a state, a European state, to go and enslave other people. And that is, if you ask me, the Pope is the head of the Vatican and has been the head of the Vatican for a very long time. If you ask me, that history clearly points out to you and shows you the differences and the slave trades. And I'm not.
Okay, can I reply? Sorry.
Are you proud of the Pope, the Christian Pope, for doing that?
1 second. He has just compared, which Pope was it?
Pope Nicholas.
He has just made Pope Nicholas equal to Muhammad.
No,
so in other words, a bad example of a Pope is as good as Muhammad. That's what he just did.
No, I
because
didn't.
Muhammad permitted slaves. Muhammad permitted his followers to invade lands that were not their own and suppress Christians. Do you know what it's called? It's called dimitude. If you don't believe me what dimitude looks like, go and speak to the Greeks. They had 400 years of it shoved down their throats. Go and speak to the Romanians. Go and speak to the Hungarians. Go and speak to the Albanians. Go and speak to the Lebanese Christians. Go and speak to the Georgian Christians. Go and speak to the Armenian Christians. Go and speak to the Coptic Christians. Go and speak to the Ethiopian Christians. All of these groups, Dawuud, suffered because Muhammad's Sharia law permitted Muslims to go into their lands, to steal them, to kidnap them, to oppress them and suppress them. Now his example was a pope. I'll stand here and say that that pope was a failure of a man and as a Christian. All you have to do is say Muhammad was the failure of a man and as a prophet. That's what you have to do, Dawuud. I've condemned the Pope, you condemn the Prophet. Now, let's just say this. I want to give an attestation by a scholar. His name is John Azuma. John Azuma is not some white Caucasian apologist. He is an African scholar and he has studied the slave trade. The book that I am quoting, Dawuud, for you is The Legacy of the Arab. Sorry, I can't read it because I'm getting old. The Arab...
47, 48.
The Arab what?
47, 48.
The I can't even read it. Arab something in Africa. Page 156 to 162. John Azuma states, now you stop listening, but that's fine.
No, I haven't.
In the areas like North Africa, the Middle East and Turkey, black slaves, this is black slaves of Arab Muslims, did the meanest and the hardest work. Now bearing in mind, his argument is that the slavery of the Muslims was this benign, nice thing where you couldn't tell the slave from the free man.
No, I didn't say that.
But John Azuma has got into study the historical records, not just one photograph, and this is his conclusion. The first generation and plantation slaves in Muslim lands was as harsh and cruel as any other such system, which means that the Islamic slavery was just as brutal and savage and dark and as twisted as the colonial slave trade. But here's a difference. The colonial slave trade lasted for 300 years. The Islamic slave trade has lasted for 1400 years, and it is still going on today. In Sudan, in Mauritania, in Saudi Arabia, and without any prompting from me, Kuwait. And what do all those countries have in common? Is it their economy? No. Is it their culture? No. Is it their ethnicity? No. Is it their political leadership? No. What do all four of those countries have in common? Islam. That's the problem. I am not being narrow. We've already talked about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the socio-economic political context of that peninsula has been dominated by Islam for 1400 years. Muslims, even if it was not passed in law that they should not have had slaves, if their heart was truly transformed, they could have freed them. They could have ceased to participate. Like Muslims don't participate in drinking alcohol in our kuffar state. But they didn't. They did continue to sell and buy slaves. Why? Because Islam failed to change their hearts. Am I being unfair? Am I being unrealistic? Where is the fault in my logic?
No, you're right about that. Slavery wasn't ended by Islam.
I agree.
Can you show him the reference where Jesus confirmed slavery? Can you just let us finish?
I don't think that.
Can you let him?
You said.
Yeah. Okay. It's very ugly. Yeah.
You said quite a lot of stuff. You said quite a lot of stuff. But then you said like, there's no similarities, and
well, let's deal with a point that's close to your counterpoint. Your counterpoint was I'm just focusing on religion. So deal with the example of the Arabian Peninsula, where
I don't want to talk
Muslims
with you.
could have just said, look, we're not participating in the slave trade, but did. Where Islam has dominated every aspect of that society, politically, economically, socially, morally, in every possible way, in art, in culture, in everything.
Is it?
It has. It has.
Are you sure?
From the time of Muhammad, Islam has dominated Saudi Arabia.
No, it hasn't. What about?
Oh my gosh.
No. That's the point I'm trying to make. Look, before we go on, you said something along the lines of.
Let's deal with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. You said you mentioned Saudi and then you mentioned Sudan. And you said, well, their economies aren't. It's not the affecting factor why slavery exists. Do you know of Sudanese economy? And you know what? You know how? Do you know how the economy is built?
Their economy is pretty much a modern economy.
Yeah, but did you know that Sudan, for example, also heavily depends on oil, just like Saudi?
So you're saying it's oil that leads to slavery?
No, I'm not saying that.
That's what you're trying to say?
No.
So what are you saying then?
I am saying to you that you are making loads of points that I'm sure that if we were to go into the details...
Mauritania doesn't have an economy built on oil, it still has slavery. So what's your point?
But what else are they built on?
Islam.
See, that's what I'm trying to say. So Mauritania has a non-existent economy to begin
So we've got multi-billion economy in Saudi Arabia. We've got a failing economy in Sudan, and we've got zero economy in Mauritania. So we've got the highest level, the medium level, and the lowest level of economy, and we still got slavery. Why?
And then that's how you're comparing economies. You do know that certain economies. It doesn't matter how the GDP is.
Dawuud,
let me finish. That its manifestation, can create situations where certain things are viable to do. For example, let me tell you Mauritania and Saudi Arabia, those two. In Saudi Arabia, you are able, because people are extremely wealthy, okay, you have the ability to own maids. In the UK, you can't.
That would deal with my point.
I'm dealing with your point, but you have to allow me to be nuanced.
My
point. If I can't be nuanced, then I'm not. I don't feel I'm being intellectual. I'm just being honest with you. I want to be nuanced. I want to open up these conversations that people can watch and be like, oh, what Dawuud said that. Let me go and watch.
Yeah.
And then they can learn something, or maybe not. Maybe they can prove me wrong. So what I'm trying to say to you, look, it doesn't mean that economies they resemble each other based upon their GDP. They can resemble each other in different forms. For example, like I said to you, in Saudi Arabia, or on Kuwait, every 2 in 4 women own maids. This is something that we don't have here. The economy allows that.
Massacre of Banu Qurayza.
Dan, in Mauritania, right?
And actually children.
The disparity between humans, that you would have power clans versus like immigrants and all these things, it facilitates these things to happen.
Right, 1 second.
That's what I'm trying to say.
But the point is,
it's important.
If their economies have dissimilarity, the dissimilarity is sufficient enough to eliminate economy as the causal factor.
Have you just? What did I just say to you? I wanted to see if you understood what I said.
You were saying that
it's a good point.
You were saying that the structures within those societies permit the holding of other people as property. So in Arabia, it's because they're rich. And in Mauritania, it's because they're poor. Did I hear you right?
I'm saying it's not the defining factor, but it's one.
Right, 1 second. Now let me demonstrate why your logic. Dawuud, right? You strike me as someone who's sincerely trying to defend his faith. Right, and I can respect that.
Not.
1 second.
I don't feel defensive.
You're trying to defend your prophet from the evidence, and I get that. What I'm saying to you, though, is, right, The reason why in Saudi Arabia someone can own a maid as a slave is because the government does not make it illegal and does not enforce a law of illegality.
Okay.
The reason why in Mauritania someone can own someone as a slave is because the government doesn't make it illegal, and in the case of Mauritania, probably doesn't even have the resources to impose the law. But that is not true in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has the money, has the means, and has the ability. It's a well-organized state. It could abolish slavery if it wanted to. The people could refuse to participate
In it,
but they don't. Now, what's that pointing to? It's pointing to a historical precedent that has established something in culture that people think is acceptable.
But has that to do
is
with Islam, though?
Yes, it has.
So why aren't there slaves in Senegal?
Because they aren't as good Muslims as they are in Saudi Arabia.
No, that's, you see,
So-
that's your criteria.
One second, bro. Senegal was colonized, right? Was Saudi Arabia colonized? By Europeans.
Depends how you want to define it. They were to an extent, yes.
1400 years. 1400 years. The thing is, bro, the reason why you want to whitewash history is because don't bite to him in the same way that I'm not biting to Yahya. Don't bite to him. Ignore me. Stay focused on me like I'm focused on you. Yeah?
Don't touch me, please.
Right? Stay focused on me like I'm focused on you. For 1400 years, Islam dominated every aspect of the Arabian Peninsula. Okay? It is not an accident that that culture still embraces slavery. It is because of Islam.
You could say that, but then I give you an example. In Senegal, it doesn't exist.
Senegal was colonized by Europeans.
Oh, now you're doing the whole because the Europeans came to,
1 second.
to Africa.
We use slavery, we abolish slavery. Agreed? We abolish slavery. When we abolish slavery, our gunboats suppressed the Berber pirates who were taking slaves.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah.
French and British people, when they decided, finally, their conscience was woken up to abolishing slavery, they started imposing that around the world. Right, and I think that was right.
When you colonize
Islam dominated
other
huge
countries.
tracts of the world in the Ottoman Empire and never abolished slavery, even though they had the chance and the opportunity. They never took it. They never took it.
But we remember, we established that already. I already said to you that the criteria of abolishing slavery, I'm saying, and this is why I believe the Quran is so superior, because the Quran is a book that is secular. So whenever something arises, so say, for example, today, Bob, look, we live in a time that it could change. 50 years from now, slavery could be the thing again. When that happens, okay, I will be with the people who are going to fight with yourself, because you feel, I seem like you would be someone like, fight against that system, that slavery does not come back. But what I'm saying to you is that the Quran itself would have regulations how to deal with it. Remember the example I've shown you, that fascinating picture? There was an Ottoman merchant and his slave, and you won't be able to tell who the slave was. The reason why I mentioned that was because, the reason, by the way, I forgot to say that. The reason why I mentioned that is because the manifestation of slavery in society could have been different to how it was in Virginia or Mississippi with the lynching of people, right? I'm not trying to say that the Ottoman slavery was better than the I'm just saying they're different, and therefore when we compare them, because that's what we keep doing, we're not being intellectually not being as precise as we should be, because their manifestation, its time, its history, its influence are totally different.
Can I reply?
Yeah, sure.
So my reply is this. I quoted you an attestation by a scholar who studied this very subject, and he has stated, having done research into the Islamic slave trade and of its treatment of black Africans, his conclusion was that it was every bit as brutal and as savage as the European slave trade. Every bit. John Azuma says that. That's not me. Go and read his book. Go and read his book, Dawuud. Go and read his book. That's his attestation. Your argument is essentially based off a photo. Now,
it was just a snapshot of
It's a snapshot,
society, of
but I'm
society.
giving you the attestation of a scholar who's done in-depth research into more than just pictures and into more than just one picture. He's gone into the records. He's gone into the documents.
So have I.
Brother, the
have I.
end of the day is this is the choice that faces you, Dawuud, right? Because I saw glimpses of the internal battle within you.
I will lie,
That
but
you-
I have no. Look,
One
I'm
second.
not defensive.
1 second.
I don't feel
One second,
ashamed,
Dawuud.
but I am
1
nuanced,
second,
and
Dawuud.
you don't like that.
You say that, but you
Yeah.
had the opportunity to say on camera. The camera will testify to all of this. You had the opportunity on camera to say that you were proud of the rights that Muhammad gave you. You declined to do so.
No, I didn't.
When
I
I quoted,
didn't.
when I quoted Muhammad having bringing people back into slavery that were released.
What did I
And
say?
I quoted Sahih Dawuud and Sahih Al-Bukhari, your instinct was to distance yourself from your own literature and your own authorities because your conscience was telling you don't want to be associated with that kind of man, and I don't blame you.
Why do I have to
So,
affirm?
one
Why
second.
do I have to affirm?
1 second, 1 second.
It's like black and white with
One
you.
second.
Why do I have to affirm?
1 second, bro. Right, I am saying to you that you need to pick up the gospel, you need to pick up the Bible, you need to read it for yourself, and you need to read it without all the lies of the Dawah team. You need to read it.
There's loads of beautiful
Read
things in the
it.
Bible.
Read it.
There's loads of things in the
Dawud.
Bible that I am amazed by.
Have you got a Bible?
I have a Bible at home.
Okay.
There's something, you got the wrong guy,
Yeah,
brother. I'm not.
that's fine.
I don't have an inferiority
What I'm
complex.
saying is,
I don't defend.
what I'm saying is,
It's just how
Dawud,
it is.
What I'm saying
I'm
is,
nuanced, and you don't like it.
what I'm saying is, Dawud. No,
Yeah.
it's not about you being nuanced. It's
It
about-
is. It is because what's the definition of nuance?
No, that's not about you being nuanced. I've got no problem with you
now
being
it's
nuanced.
not. Okay.
I've got no problem with you being nuanced.
Okay, because that's
But
what I'm doing. It's
what
not. I'm
the
not running away
People
from
will
stuff.
make their own judgment whether you wanted to distance yourself from Muhammad's example or
I
not.
haven't.
They
I
can make
haven't.
their own judgment.
I haven't.
The
I just-
camera,
Yeah,
Dawud,
sorry.
let people
Apologies,
make their
apologies.
own minds up.
Apologies.
Let people make their own minds up. I've said what I've said. I've
Yeah.
said you have. You said you haven't.
Yeah.
Let people watch the video. Let them decide for themselves.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, what this is, and this is what I leave you with, right? And it's what I leave everyone who's listened to this debate all the way through, especially if you're Muslim. You need to ask yourself, in good conscience, can I follow the example of Muhammad in everything that he did? And if you can't, it's time to find yourself a better example. And if you look at Jesus and you can follow him in every example that he did, then it's time to follow him.
Hold on.
Right, 1 second.
Look,
you need
12,
to pick up a Bible.
47,
You
48.
need to read it for yourself.
Jesus example.
Without the lies of the Dawah team, without the script that Muslims hear in the masjid, and you need to come to conclusions independent of the lies you're told about the Christian faith.
Okay. First of all, he said to follow the Prophet Muhammad SAW with everything he did. Look, our jurisprudence does not even allow us to do that. We can't even do that. Look, the Prophet Muhammad SAW was, for example, not allowed to take charity. We are allowed to take charity, so we can't follow him in that. So this is what I'm trying to say. I feel like, again, I think you have huge potential, and the critique, some of the critique you brought up today was valid. I will say that. But I'll also say that because you make sweeping statements that are incorrect, and I showed you how incorrect you were. For example, the Enlightenment thing. You were like, oh, Enlightenment brought back slavery. I've shown you, and this everyone can go and research, in the 14th century that Pope Nicholas, who is, whether you like or not, he is part of Christian history, who sanctioned a decree to Alfonso V to go and enslave Africans, in particular, Saracens, Muslims.
Was that wrong?
Huh?
Well, what the Pope did, was it wrong?
It was wrong, yeah, because I'm a Muslim. And
When Muhammad did
yeah.
it, was it wrong?
No, it wasn't. Why
So
would
when
why
the
would it be wrong?
Pope does it, it's wrong,
Yeah.
but when Muhammad does it, it's right. Do you see the problem?
No, that's not the reason why.
You're essentially.
That's not the reason
your
why. That's not the
defense-
reason why. That's not the reason
Dawuud,
why.
your
Again, look,
defense-
you can't. How are you commenting? How?
Dawuud, your
Explain
defense.
to me. Explain to
Go
me,
on.
please.
Go on.
Explain to me. How in the hell are you commenting on something like Pope Nicholas? We don't even know he existed.
Right.
What you have to do now, first of all, is
Let
to
me
go
reply.
back. You have to go back and research yourself.
Let me reply.
Then rationalize it, and then you can say.
So let me reply.
You can't. You
Let me
can't
reply.
use him. You can't use him that evidence. Oh, you comparing.
No, I can't,
I am
and
not
I'm going to
comparing him.
explain why.
I wasn't comparing Pope Nicholas, by the way, to the Prophet Muhammad SAW. The reason why I brought up Pope Nicholas is because historically he said something incorrect. It had nothing to do with the Prophet.
I will accept the correction.
So what?
Dawuud is right. I am
No.
wrong. I am wrong. The reintroduction of slavery happened before the Enlightenment. But here's the problem. Dawuud's essential defense of the Prophet was, I'm a murderer, you're a murderer, so therefore I'm justified in being a murderer. No, that doesn't work. And he knows it doesn't work. Saying that if I am a liar and you are a liar, does that make it justified that I am a liar? If I am a murderer and you are a murderer, does it make it justified that I am a murderer? If I own slaves and you own slaves, does the fact that you own slaves make it right that I own slaves? You all heard it on camera. When Pope Nicholas,
why are you comparing?
Allowed, because you did.
No, I brought it up because you made historically
and
wrong.
I've accepted the historical correction.
Yeah,
I've accepted the historical correction.
That's a straw man.
I'm comparing. I'm comparing.
You.
Tell me why my comparison. Tell me why my comparison is wrong. You said on camera when Pope Nicholas allowed Catholic Christians to enslave Muslims, that was wrong.
Yeah, why?
I am saying.
Why?
I am saying.
That's why.
Then if it was wrong for Pope Nicholas, why is it right for Muhammad to permit Muslims to own Christians as slaves?
There's obviously a reason why. There's obviously a reason why I think what Pope Nicholas did was wrong.
So why is it right when Muhammad did it?
No, the reason why Pope Nicholas, what he did was wrong, is because Pope Nicholas instructed Alfonso to go to places that were sovereign. They were sovereign states.
Like Ottomans?
No, they
like
were
Mamluks?
They were West Africans.
Like Uthmans?
Well, that's fine. But I already said this. If you look at Islamic history, you'll find a lot of problematic things. So I have no problem with that.
Did Muhammad permit Muslims to own Christians as slaves? Did he sanction it?
Well, hold on. What do you mean?
According to Sharia law, we've already got you on camera saying that you have the right to own other human beings as property.
Woo!
The camera will...
There was a clause. There was a big clause. There was a very, very big clause. And that's what I mean with nuance.
Can you own Christians as slaves? According to Sharia law.
Muslims as slaves, Dawuud.
Huh?
Can you own Muslims?
No,
as
I
slaves?
can't.
Can you own Christians as slaves, Dawuud?
Via warfare.
Can you own Christians as slaves?
Can I own Christians as slaves?
He knows the answer is yes.
No, I'm trying to think. Let me think.
Come on, Muslim can have another Muslim as a slave.
Huh?
If the Christian wants a war against Muslim, if the Christian,
No, I'm saying as it's a warfare thing. We're saying clauses, slavery is done in a warfare. Now I won't do the apologetics thing.
No, it's not about apologetic. Habibi, look, Habibi, when you say
you're doing apologetics.
no,
I'm just saying,
Habibi, when you say Habibi, yeah,
Christian
Habibi,
can own a Muslim.
Habibi,
There you go.
When you
But
say
That's
under
the problem.
under a clause though.
No, Habibi, when
you
you
go
say
to war with a township, sorry, I'll let you go.
no, but you said something that needs correcting. You said you can own a Muslim as a slave. You can't. You can't.
You can. How many?
No, hold on, wait, Habibi, wait. The reason why you can't do that is because I can't go and own a free Muslim. If I own someone and he becomes Muslim, of course it's going to be. That's what you have to say.
I'm saying if you're a Muslim tribe.
I'm free.
For example,
Yeah.
a Shanti Muslim has a fight with a fancy Muslim, warfare.
Yeah.
If one trumps over the other,
Yeah.
are you telling me that one cannot take the others as
You
Jariah?
can do it, but it's not
I'm not
allowed.
saying- Bro,
You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to own a free Muslim.
Can you own a free Christian after warfare?
ContentCOE every time. From now to Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen. COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to
he's right what he said, because in the war, if somebody beats somebody else, they can take them as spoils of war.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just seen on camera
It's the spoils of war.
What you have just seen on camera
Nothing to do with Islam now.
Muslims saying that it is okay to have slaves after warfare. That is the problem with Islam.
Because
That is why we
if a Muslim fighting against the Christian, the Christian will do the same. The Christian,
Personally, in my understanding of Islamic law, I think you're right.
the Christian will do the same. The Christian will do the same.
Dawuud's position is that you can't, in war, you can't take a free Muslim as a slave, but you can take a free Christian as a slave.
No, I don't know. I don't know.
His position is that you can take Muslims and Christians